Hey friends, Chris here with Little Roots Ranch, and today I wanted to talk about 10 veggies that grew really well for me in 2022. Obviously, during the summer growing season, I was making a list of next week's video is going to be 10 things that didn't grow as well. But I was trying to reflect as I get ready for placing my seed order and stuff like that. I'm really deep diving into my garden and thinking about what went really well, what was a little bit of a struggle, for things that were a struggle. Do I consider a different type or, different brand of, like, say, spinach or something like that. So I wanted to share my list of things that grew really well in 2022. Now, granted, each year it could be different because of the weather or anything like that. And I would encourage you to share even a couple things that grew really well in your garden, or if something grew really well that hasn't historically grown really well, then I'd also love to hear about that too. But anyways, jumping into the list. So the first thing on my list is garlic. And I feel like garlic would be on my list every year for the rest of my life. To me, garlic is a really easy thing to grow. In the late fall, I put it in the ground and I don't water it. In the early spring, I put some fermented stinging nettle juice on it. But for the most part, it just goes by itself. I don't mulch over it. I don't fret over it. I love the garlic scapes in the Mayish whenever they come up. Excuse me. And for me, it's just really easy. I get really large bulbs, of which I save the biggest ones for my seed stock and eat or sell the smaller ones. And it just is like clockwork. I find it really easy to grow. So I feel like that would be on my list every single year. Hopefully, knock on wood. The next one is zucchini. Zucchini grows really, really well for me. I think the key is giving it enough room to do its thing. But I grew zucchini out in the field meaning not in a greenhouse. And most of these items are not in a greenhouse. I'll mention the two that are. But they grew really well. They produced all year long. It's interesting because my farming buddies on the East Coast, they will go through several successions of zucchini because they succumb to disease and like vine borers and all that stuff. The pests and diseases on the East Coast are completely different than up here. We're very pampered, by the way. I know we're not without any struggles, of course, but I do feel a little bit that our struggles pale in comparison to like my East Coast farmers and like Central America farmers. And so I'm thankful for that always. But I had my single succession. I did plan to have a second succession, but I didn't get around to it. And those plants produced all throughout the summer into the fall and were only stopped by a killing frost. And so, because obviously sensitive to the frost. So zucchini is definitely on my list. I have had not as much luck with zucchini when I've done tighter spacing or not doing adequate, like making sure that there's enough like soil or whatever. But as long as you give it an ideal situation, it should grow really well. For me, the next thing is eggplants. Now, this was greenhouse grown eggplant. I did the Asian eggplant instead of Italian. From my understanding, the Italian ones are more round, or well, not like round, like basketball, but like they're bigger, like, I don't know. I'm the worst at this. Whereas the Asian ones are like long and skinny, kind of like zucchinis. But I switched the brand and I am absolutely excited. Historically, when I've grown Italian eggplants, the DTM, which is days to maturity, is also longer. And I found that they just didn't ripen in time. I don't know if it was the warmer summer or the greenhouse. I didn't have a control plant that was outside of the greenhouse or, whatever. But this year, it was insane. I could have had eggplant every single dinner or every single night for dinner the entire summer long. And they didn't need trellising. They're beautiful. They're an interesting crop. I love eggplants. And so it worked out really well. So I definitely, Asian eggplants for the win. Italian eggplants, I've not been able to figure out, but I'm never looking back. So Asian eggplants from here on out. The next one is strawberries, and those are in the greenhouse as well. And those little plants, those of you who've been with me for a while know that I did that albinon. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, but that's what I call them. Strawberries, and they are ever bearing. So they're not June bearing and just produce early spring, but there's a large flush like in the spring and then also again in the early fall, but they do continue to produce the whole time. And I kid you not, I had so many strawberries, it was insane. And they were good size, they were sweet, they looked beautiful. The plants they were prolific at spreading. I was supposed to clip a lot more runners than I did, but they were just they were too aggressive for me. But I guess having a strawberry weed problem is a lot better than I can't think of anything. What's the thistle or whatever like that. So strawberries in the greenhouse for the win. Next is carrots. Now carrots, I drew a little star next to on my little list. Carrots. So my first batch of carrots I planted, so in the front of my garden, if you know the names, it's the people garden. The people garden, I've struggled to grow things. And I think that the soil there, I need to get it tested, but I'm pretty sure that it is low calcium and has a couple other problems. I did get a bad batch of compost several years ago that I used to start all as the very first set of gardens I had. The compost place is no longer in business, so you don't have to worry about getting the same one if you are near me. But it basically turned my ground into concrete, and I'm not like exaggerating at all. Like you could knock on it and it was like knocking on somebody's front door. And every year since, which this is my third growing year in that area, just wrapping up my third growing year, it was terrible. I've not had any luck, so I'm not sure. I have to decide. I thought about doing a one-time till and just breaking all of that up and going down each of the rows. I also thought about adding raised beds because I kind of want to do the flowers up there. One is right next to the house, so that would be really beautiful, but then it cuts my vegetable growing area to just the back gardens. But I need to figure out what I'm going to do. But anything that I planted up there just hasn't done well. Not this year, not the year before that, and not 3 years before that. And I don't think it has anything to do with plants or my abilities. I think it's just a bad area, and sometimes you get those dead zones. So I need to amend it or start anew with raised beds, which I think I'm kind of leaning towards, but we'll get to that in another video. So at first I had planted carrots there because I was thinking like that carrots might be great at like breaking up that ground or something like that. I don't really know what I was thinking. Carrots require a lot. Carrots are easy and difficult. If you know how to grow them, they're easy. If you don't, they're very difficult. And so the seeds have to stay moist the entire time of their exceptionally long germination period. So it's up by the house. So I thought, oh, you know what? That's probably a better play. I can put the carrot seed. I can make sure that I'm hand watering every single day and twice a day on hot days to make sure that they stay evenly moist and they can germinate and be beautiful. Well, that didn't work. So what I did was I put like thousands of carrots in the backpack, and I actually didn't do that great of a job of keeping up on the watering, but to my surprise, they did really well. I did seed them a little more thickly than normal. And so I think that but I do think that also made a difference. But yeah, for me, carrots were growing like gangbusters, not the first batch in the dead area, but when I was growing in my main gardens in the back, they grew I still to this day have so many carrots. And my boleros, which are like more of a longer like storage carrot or whatever, those things are massive, like completely could be used as weapons. They're like that thick and like they're massive. So yeah, carrots made the list. So this isn't a specific plant, but this is something I wanted to share that I'm big on. I don't know how you guys do. I know some people are really against volunteer plants. I welcome volunteer plants with open arms. And so I find that any plant that volunteers does really, really, really well. Now, there are concerns about, depending on what kind of plant it is, obviously, there are concerns with cross-pollination or something like that, but it depends. So I didn't grow any tomatoes up in the front garden, which is the dead zone. We just talked about that. the people garden, but I did grow tomatoes there last year. And tomatoes are pretty good about not cross-pollinating, even though pollinators visit them. And so I had all the tomatoes that grew there, volunteer plants, which volunteer plants are, if you don't know, they are plants that come back on their own without any work of the gardener. So obviously last year at some point, a few tomatoes, / a lot of them, fell down and rotted for whatever reason, and then hung out during the winter and then emerged in late spring. Well, they're tomatoes, so I guess it was early summer. But there's other plants like my auroch did that, and my nasturtium, and boy, there's a lot of all my peas. I had a potato. I had all kinds of stuff. Anyways, volunteer plants come back on their own. And so they tend to be more hardy because they're used to your growing area. It's effectively like seed saving and then planting, but without all that work. And so I always find that those are robust plants and that produce well. And depending on what kind of plant it is, it'll be just like tomatoes are excellent for volunteers because it's a reduced risk for cross-pollination. But something like a squashes are really big if you're growing like zucchini and then also yellow squash and also pumpkins and gourds and all that stuff. Like the seeds, can be a little bit of a ride. Now, everything's always edible, and you might come up with a new, better thing, or you might come up with something that's not as edible. Always edible, but not as delicious. So any volunteer plants grow well in the garden. Next is tomatillos. Tomatillos grow like gangbusters for me. You do need more than one plant, lesson learned also in 2022, but they grow so big. Like I feel like spacing for a single tomatillo plant would be like 2 to 3 feet, like in every direction. And realistically, you only need 2 as long as you make sure that they live, obviously, maybe 3 for safety, depending on like your size and stuff like that. But tomatillos grow amazingly well, produce amazingly well, keep producing, and it's a unique flavor. I really like it using cooking, salsas, whatever. And I like eating them just raw. I like the flavor, a little sour. So yeah, tomatillos grew really well for me this year and every year. Next are beets. And so beets grow really well for me. And I have heard from a lot of other people that they really, really struggle with getting beets to size up. I find that the purple, so I prefer the yellow beets because I don't have to deal with my purple, my fingers being purple or my counter being dyed purple from like cutting them up or cooking them or whatever. The yellow ones look cooler, I think, in my opinion, but the purple ones are easier to grow. And a lot of times they're that classic beets that customers are looking when they're like purchasing products from me. And so I always grow the purple ones. I find that the purple ones grow bigger than the yellow ones, and I've grown several different. I think this year it was Gold Touch that I grew for the yellow ones, Goldstone maybe, Touchstone, I don't remember. But beets grew really well. If you're growing beets and they're just not sizing up for you, 1, make sure you're giving them enough time. 2, you might want to check the composition of your soil because root vegetables use different nutrients that might read as fertilizer for some people, but nutrients than above the ground producing. So for instance, if you have beets or carrots, and most people put a lot of nitrogen in their like plants, like if you want to grow tomatoes, a lot of people will add fertilizer like nitrogen. But if you do that to your beets or your carrots, it's actually going to work the opposite, because that's for like growing the tops. But with beets, the tops are used. With carrots, not as much. But growing that larger, sometimes useless top actually is at the expense of the root down below. So if you understand that, then you might be able to apply that to the beets and see if they get bigger, and also making sure you're not seeding too densely, or that you're making sure to go back and thin them if you're like hand seeding or whatever. Beet seeds can also contain multiple, they don't mind touching, but you don't want too many. Each beet seed can actually contain like 1, 2, 3, 4 seeds in it. So even if you plant 1 seed every like inch, for instance, you can still end up with way too many beets for that area. So, but for me, beets grew really well. I grew huge beets like size of my head, the ones that I let go until fall, and they were massive. The next thing is cherry tomatoes. Now I really struggled with putting tomatoes on because I was thinking things that grew really well and were easy. And tomatoes in general never strike me as easy because there's the pruning, there's the staking, there's the like all of those things. The additional, I put the eggshells down when I'm planting them. You usually have to start them earlier inside. And so, I mean, they're worth it and they're amazing. But I don't think of tomatoes and easy like something that like goes together really well. But they're so delicious, and cherry tomatoes are really awesome because the plants, if they're healthy or whatever, will produce so many. And if they fall over, they're smaller plants, so it's a little easier than like a big like beefsteak tomato or whatever. So I kind of went back and forth on whether or not to put it, and I did end up putting it because little red and orange and yellow globes in the garden come snack time or while you're watering are amazing. And the cherry tomatoes do grow really well. The regular tomatoes grow pretty well as well. But the cherry tomatoes, I think, are always easier to grow for Pacific Northwest gardens. And then last but not least, I put chives. I love chives. They're so easy to grow as long as the rabbits don't eat them. I know that the internet says that rabbits will not eat onions. I'm here to tell you that 100% of people on the internet are wrong, because except me, because I can't grow chives in the ground anymore. I actually have raised like flower pots or whatever, like just regular pots, and I grow chives in there, and that stopped the rabbits, and then I've been okay since. But they're perennial, which means that, you know, you don't have to do much work. You have to divide them after so many years to keep the plant healthy. But they're cut and come again, meaning that you can harvest them. They're one of the earliest to pop up in the spring. You can cut them, enjoy them in your cooking when a lot of your other vegetables and stuff like that are not ready. And they'll just keep coming back in like a week or 10 days or something. Like once it's warmer, it's just really fast. And if they do end up going to seed, the seed is beautiful. Also edible, but it's beautiful. It's like a purple globe. It's just, I love chives. They grow really well as long as you can keep them away from the rabbits. And so they also made my list. So those are the 10 things that I found in 2022 that were really easy to grow in my garden. And so I wanted to share those. Again, if you found anything or any feedback, comments, go ahead and drop those down below. If you made it this far, go ahead and put a like, because I would really appreciate that, trying to grow. And next week, I will be back with the hardest things that I grew in my garden. But thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day. Happy late Thanksgiving. Sorry, I should have said that earlier. And happy gardening. Bye.